Hey everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Mindrolling, and I'm just talking to a new guest, and saying, "Wow, this is a great opportunity. We haven't been able to meet before. I've known of Thomas Hübl. Is that good?
Very good, actually.
For a very long time, and Thomas is really a phenomenal expert around trauma, and has I did pick up Thomas this. Well, first of all, welcome. Glad to have you.
Thank you. Thank you, Raghu.
And there's this wonderful book that Thomas did with Richard Schwartz. Releasing Our Burdens is the title of it. And Richard is very well known for internal family systems, which many people are very familiar with. And it's an amazing practice. And but before any of that, I'm really curious how you landed in Israel. Thomas is in Israel, and but beyond that, a little bit about what happened in terms of how did you? I this is how I start most of my chats in terms of trying to get to know somebody. What is it that brightened your life by virtue of understanding that you are not your mind, your senses, and that there's something else out there? It's called by so many different names, but how did you encounter that something that, for me, it completely changed the course of my life?
Mm. Yeah, that's what it does. Right. So how did it happen? I mean, it's a bit, it started with, I remember as a boy, I didn't kind of resonate so much with because I grew up in Vienna and outside, a little bit outside of Vienna.
Mm.
And the Catholic Church, what not the church itself, but how it felt for me where I grew up in the village that I grew up in, didn't fully resonate for me. But the deeper, like spiritual connection to the divine always resonated for me. So already as a boy, I found myself praying for myself, and like I had this internal relationship as a boy, but then it didn't feel like it. I had an external environment that mirrored that back to me the way I would have needed it. Also, my parents didn't. So, and when I was, so then another step was that is important, even if it sounds a bit different at first, is when I was 16, I joined as a volunteer the Red Cross, and I started training as a paramedic because I knew I'm going to study medicine. So I'm I'm I was really into emergency medicine, but I was also into serving because it was a volunteer engagement. So I like this sense of serving society. And so when I was 19, I started to study, and then I started a regular meditation practice because I suddenly
Really,
felt
that young? Wow.
yeah. But I didn't read books about meditation, but I felt I need like some time to be still every day. So I did that. And then as I encountered maybe 1 or 2 years later, all kinds of books about yoga, about body therapy, about spirituality. So I started to be really interested in that. And when I was 26, I actually decided to leave my studies and to go to meditate for, as it turned out, around 4 years. And that was a deep time for me. That was like a detox time, and it opened up a lot. And so that was these 4 years laid the foundation for everything that came after.
Was a
And
retreat that you went to actually for that term?
Yeah, I was in Czech Republic most of the time, and yeah, in the many days, I felt I need to meditate and a lot, and to get to know like inner dimensions
Mm.
deeper and deeper, and it was a powerful time. And then after that, my life changed, and then I met a spiritual teacher, Paul Lowe. He saw me, and he
Who
whatever
was
he
that?
said about Paul Lowe.
Paulo.
Paulo, yeah, from Australia. And
Uh-huh.
so through him, I kind of, he saw me after this time, and then he said a few things in a workshop, and people invited me for workshops, and then it took another turn, and then my life completely changed again. So then I
Mm-hmm.
traveled around the world just with a suitcase and a laptop, and I started giving lots of workshops, and then we built all kinds of stuff ever since. And yeah, I think the current work now, we are 25 years or more later,
Oh, really?
and
Wow.
yeah,
Mm. How did,
that's a little bit a short run through
yes,
my.
yeah, little by little. Uh, it's amazing how this all happens for individuals in terms of waking up and what happened subsequently. We could never have predicted, really, in any way. And I mean, in my case, I was, I can't say I was immediately interested in inner investigation and meditation. I was more, what is going on here? I can't take one more second of the society, of what the school and parents and what everybody is telling me I should be or shouldn't be. And out of that, and then of course the psychedelic thing was very powerful at that time, and then the whole my whole life changed when I met Ramdas,
Mm,
and there was somebody I could trust as a teacher, and ended up in India with him when he went back the second time.
mm,
And yeah, and I'm in my early, 24 or something. And the rest of my life was all brought together in a way I could never, in my wildest dreams, have predicted. But yeah, the rest of my life was dictated by that moment. And so, very, very fortunate in that way. Now, I've been thinking about this ever since okay, we're going to get together. How did you end up in Israel, though?
yeah, I ended up here because after, I think, some years of traveling around the world and going from city to city and doing all these workshops, and also beginning to learn from many of these groups that grew pretty quickly. I saw these patterns that later on evolved into the kind of collective trauma work. And and so I started to study this and deepen my understanding. And after some years, I got to know my wife today. She's an international Israeli artist, and so we
Oh,
settled in Berlin
oh,
first. And then because of, so we stayed for 7 or 8 years in Berlin because has a studio in Berlin, and so she has her work also outside of Israel. But then through various circumstances in her family, and also she's a teacher at the university asked her to come here, and so we moved here. This was a decade ago, and
oh,
so we started. First, we came only for a year, and then the year is another year and another year
yeah,
eventually.
right.
So I
Carried you.
started to travel from here all over the world to do the work, and came back. But actually, then as I deepened my understanding about the ongoing, decades of conflict and wars and another war and another war. So as I deepened my international work, I did a lot of work also with Nazi descendants and Holocaust survivors and descendants,
Mm,
and
mm,
brought big groups together to heal this shadow. And so I think that also led me in a way here into this region because of the interconnectedness of the European history and the
Mm.
Middle East, which I think is still very unresolved and undertaken care of. So it perpetuates the conflict versus heals it. And so yeah, so and then I became a student of the situation here through
Uh-huh.
living here. And I'm
Oh,
contemplating deeply and learning all the time about trauma, collective trauma, and its potential healing and how it affects conflict resolution. And so we're
mhm.
doing a lot of work. Maybe we can talk about this later. But that
Yeah,
was the journey. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, when you speak to it that way, it makes all the sense in the world because this
Mm.
has been going on for thousands of years, basically.
Mm.
So talk about the hand-me-down generation after generation after generation, and we will talk about that a little bit. So in this book, you say we believe the world and its inhabitants are experiencing a meta crisis. Of course, I think well, I shouldn't say that, but many, many, many people, of course, believe that is true, and what we're going through is just that. Not just suffering from threats and stress of climate disruption, systemic oppression, alarming reemergence of fascism, and regional conflicts that continually forewarn us of larger, even nuclear war. But these and other global issues together create an ecosystem of crisis dynamics with unforeseen and converging risks. And then you add to it, as you put it, the sudden evolution of artificial intelligence and the increasing speed of information and global technology make it more difficult for our nervous systems to process our trauma and everyday anxieties. And this last little thing that really caught my eye in terms of collective experience, we also suffer from disconnection from nature, from hope, from one another, and from ourselves. And that is what we as a foundation representing Ram Dass and all these other teachers that we're close to, Jack Kornfield, etc., that is so much of our work right now is around this the disconnection that of course is there with everybody, but it's the inner disconnection that is most alarming, and that is something that we address. So yeah, we're all in this together, is what you say.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, speak to that, to the reality that we're in right now, and
Mm.
and the overwhelm for people is so huge. People
Mm.
don't know where to even start with themselves, with others, and so on. Yeah. Talk
Mm.
about that a little, Thomas.
Yeah, I often say, like, in doubt, come back to yourself.
Mm,
Right? Like, if it's so overwhelming, then somebody is overwhelmed, and then maybe we need to take a breath, come back to ourselves, and see, like, the first reality that we often find is that actually that overwhelm is not just in the moment, but that overwhelm lives in our nervous system from prior individual, ancestral, or collective trauma residues that are overwhelmed, and they live in us. And when something happens today, it touches on that inner overwhelm. And you said something else that's very important. You said the disconnect from ourselves. What does trauma do? It shuts down a part of ourselves so that we can survive or go through certain very
mm,
painful moments better. But the after effect, if it's not being taken care of, is a sense of disconnect from ourselves. So then we try to fill that hole with all kinds of other stuff that is not authentic to us, that is over consumerism, that is not feeling each other, that is creating all kinds of side effects. And so that's number two. And number three, as you read also before, is that if our nervous system has some iced over or numb areas or very activated or stressful areas,
mm,
and then the world becomes faster every moment through the speed of data that we need to process. Because I believe that an integrated nervous system can update itself to stay in tune with the global evolution. But a traumatized nervous system, the traumatized parts of us at least, are unupdatable areas. So imagine there are apps on your phone that never get an update. So after 2, 3 years, you can throw them away because they won't work. And and the same is trauma areas, they cannot get updated. The opposite, it creates more and more stress when the world becomes faster and something is frozen. The tension between those is getting bigger. And many people experiencing this, wow, it's so hard to keep up with everything. Everything becomes so complex, so fast. So I cannot breathe. And
Yeah.
then and that is something that we really need to address. Otherwise, the symptoms of that will fuel that meta crisis more and more and more, and will create some serious. I mean, we are already in some serious symptoms, but they will just be more escalated. And that's why it's a real call also for the work that your organization is doing. Everybody who is looking for how can we support this inner connection, how can we support more regulation, more space, more sometimes even slowing down that we can digest our life. And communities, like you create a community. So communities are very important because they can create resilience together. So there are
Yeah.
many things we can do also. It's not hopeless, but it needs to be done.
It's a digestion problem. It's very
It's
much
a
part of this,
digestion.
right?
Exactly.
Uh,
Yeah, because trauma is undigested past. And if you have lots of it, it's like you eat food, but you cannot digest it. So
right.
one day your body will say, stop. You can't eat more because I'm full. Like I can't even digest the stuff that is
Yeah.
already in. And that creates serious problems.
Yeah. And, and talking about, okay, moving it to healing, you say the cultivation of presence, embodiment, two things that we very much focus on in the work that we do as well, and ancestral healing. And you say all of these things require safe spaces as well as patience. Another thing that in the West we are not so handy with, patience. Myself being a prime example of it, it's something I have to work with a lot. But so I guess the thing that catches me that I don't know that much about ancestral healing. I think it'd be good. I think there are other people like me that, yes, I know the term. Yes, I know what it means ultimately. But in action, what are we really talking about?
Well, there are many ways to speak about this. Maybe I will pick a few, like a few metaphors. So you can say our nervous system, like in many spiritual traditions, you have people talk about the Kundalini stream and data flow in our different parts of our nervous systems. And when that flow is open, we experience ourselves related and as part of the interdependence of life. If it's stuck, so we feel ourselves separate. Now, we know that trauma disorganizes data flow between each other and in intrapersonal and interpersonal and transpersonal in the sense of ancestral. So the trauma that, for example, my grandfather or my grandmother experienced in World War II in Vienna, that trauma, if unresolved, doesn't disappear when they pass away. Why? Because part of it stays as unprocessed information in this is what's the system? It's the genetic system, it's the family system. So my parents inherited some of that and passed it on to me. So if we don't integrate that information, we pass it through to the next generation. If we work on this and integrate, digest some of that information, we actually grow, we mature, and we stop that transmission. When we say transmission, we say, for example, fear patterns. We know that people like born into families with a lot of trauma have more fear and stress receptors in their body. There's an epigenetic transmission of certain aspects in our inner landscape that get amplified. So there's, for example, a study of a epigeneticist in Isabel Manzui. She's a professor at Zurich University. She can show in mice experiments that when you have an attachment traumatized mouse and that mouse has offspring, 5 generations or 6 generations, the offspring has the same trauma symptoms, but was never traumatized.
Wow.
And so she could show in the epigenetic profile how sperm cells pass on information that then lives in the next generation. So there is a kind of an epigenetic transmission, or like a kind of a physical transmission of trauma. And then you have a social environment. And if that social environment has the power to kind of take care of that, then you can rewrite it. If not, then it's just being passed through, basically. And then we call it personal issues in the next generation, when in the former generation, it was actually a biographical impact. But some of us walk around and say, of course, we all have certain issues. Maybe some people really grow up in heavily traumatizing environments. But some people say, I experienced difficult situations, but it wasn't ultimately so traumatizing, but they have certain symptoms in their life that don't fit really to their biography. Because of course, some of it is attachment based and is a part of my upbringing, but part of it is a bigger system, like a bigger library that goes way beyond me, but I grow up in that environment. So for me, that environment is, first of all, normal. My family system, how people interact with each other, what happens. And so what lives in me is often reconfirmed by how people behave. And the psychological development, we call it psychological development or family systems development. But if it reconfirms itself, so it just gets stronger. And then we express those symptoms in our life, and then we pass it on to our children. And like this, there's a transmission of that data flow and some of the patterns. So maybe addiction, alcoholism, or certain fear patterns, or certain people that cannot get into relationships. Already for generations, people struggle with this. So sometimes we say, oh, it's me personal, but often it's bigger than that. And so if we don't bypass our personal issues, then it actually makes sense to increase the map of healing, how we look at some of the issues. And then we find the appropriate intervention that meets a person where they're in the area where their symptoms come from. And that's a powerful, bigger healing map. And I think our map needs to be expanded. That's why we wrote the book with Dick together, to say, because he sees it similar, he has a different language, but he came to similar conclusions. And then we said, okay, let's put our voices together and promote that expansion.
In terms of practicality, I'm just thinking of myself, and in terms of this part of the conversation. So my father was in World War II. He was we're Canadian, and he fought with the British against the Nazis, and he was a pilot of one of the bombers, and only one other person in his squad survived. That kind of, heavy trauma. And he came out of it extremely angry and unconscious. I don't dream anymore. I remember him saying, well, I don't dream anymore. And I thought, well, that's weird. Everybody dreams. But this was all part of blocking it all out, right? Now, I consider myself to be one of the most fortunate people in respect to to the family dynamic, because he set a family dynamic that was ugly. Okay, so much tension and anger, and although no physical violence, plenty of violence. And I mean, I won't. Thomas, I've told this story a billion times on these podcasts, but in speaking to you, so you understand, in this particular case, I don't know what would have happened. Now, I never thought he didn't love me, but we were at odds big time. And he actually came to India while I was there with my brother, with Neem Karoli Baba, out of the blue. And I'm like, wow, what in the world? I mean, we did say, hey, we're in this with this incredible being. It's wonderful, blah, blah, blah. And he came. And you know what? Neem Karoli Baba had me one day, the first day he was there, he said, did you give your father the medicine? And I thought, yeah, no, he had a cold. I gave him some aspirin. He said, nay, the yogi medicine Ram Dass gave me, which was acid. Okay. And I went, acid? My father went, LSD? But bottom line was, he said, okay, go off to Benares. This is where people go to die, right, for thousands of years, by the Ganges River. And he said, and meet me later. And sure enough, somebody gave me a hit of acid. I gave it to, he actually took it and had a death trip. And then we went back and we saw Neem Karoli Baba, who never said a word about the trip, just talking to him, told him a bunch of stuff nobody could know about his life. And from that moment, Thomas, a healing started for me. My entire family ended up in India. And I don't know what I would have done, because I can still feel it in me. You know, actually, my father said to me one day, many years later, are we okay? You know, are we okay? I said, yeah, we're okay. But deep down, there was still a not okay part of it. And so assimilating that not okayness into some kind of transformation has been, certainly part of my life's work at this point. So I was extraordinarily lucky. That's not a proper term in, in what happened here. Grace is probably a better term. But I don't know how many people who have heard this story from me. Wow, I wish my mother or my father, could change, could be that facilitation could happen with them so that our relationship could change. So I guess that's a little bit of my own personal experience with ancestral pain. I don't, and then you want to go further back, grandparents, and how do you suggest this to people?
First of all, it's very touching to hear your story. It's really beautiful, and and what also touches me is the composition of obviously one of the powers was that your father chose to come to India. Something was already open to hear the call.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And
totally.
Then you had the presence of Neem Karoli Baba, like as a very illuminated being, like that held as like a tremendous consciousness. But I think something in your father heard the call. That's amazing.
Absolutely. I still think
fantastic.
About it.
Yeah, fantastic. And that enabled everything else that happened after that. Was a channel open already for the grace to come in. So that's beautiful. And and I think it's a beautiful example. You said it, restorative processes can change our life. I have had sessions with people with estranged parts of the family that didn't talk to each other for 30 years. And in the night after the session, they got an email from that part of the family.
No.
Because systems are interdependent, they're interlinked, no matter if it's entangled in the trauma or if it's pulsating and open and loving and compassionate in its pulsation. But whatever it is, it's like they are not separate. They're kind of often fragmented, but they're not separate. And And so once we know that, then we see, wow, what a tremendous power of healing. In our groups, for example, in our training programs, I often have in the next training program some of the family members of the person that was in the former, because it starts to spread into the system, and then people feel suddenly similar like you. Even if they had very difficult relationships, like suddenly there's something open, and that openness is attractive. So it's being attracted, and so I think that's powerful. And then through our body, ancestry is not just an intellectual understanding. Of course, we all know we have ancestors, but that our body stores the information that has been passed down to us from our ancestors. And so through our body, we can actually get access to that information. And if we train that through this embodiment work that you're also doing, the body whole is like a library, and holds that information, and so also the ancestral information. And we do this in small pods where people practice this with each other and through all kinds of attunement practices. And if we do it in a precise way, then more and more we can feel how our consciousness expands. Not only that we are more in touch with our ancestors, that we can also feel the ancestors of other people. And so
Really?
as yeah, and then people have amazing experiences with each other because that part of their nervous system starts to de-ice,
Mm,
and it becomes more open, and suddenly we feel, oh, we can actually sense much more than we thought.
mm,
Information is not just hidden because trauma anesthetizes parts of us.
yeah.
And then when the anesthesia ceases and we feel more, and we say, wow, I never felt that. But actually, I have access to that. That's not just some magic thinking, it's literal sensing. And then people confirm that. And then when people practice with each other, they see, oh, we can feel each other also in our ancestry. Of course, we listen to each other, but we also can mirror each other back. And so this is very powerful work. And then communities ground themselves more because there is, of course, individual grounding in our body, but I believe there's also ancestral grounding. Our roots become even deeper and more alive, more enlivened. So we can also use the resources of our ancestors more. And then there's collective grounding. And so different parts of our body ground themselves through different channels. And the collective is also like a nervous system that often is
Mm,
hurt and anesthetized. Then it looks like, oh, we're all so fragmented. We don't understand each other. We speak different languages, not even physical languages, but we don't understand each other, even if we speak the same language.
yeah, right.
And then when that opens, it feels like the world becomes brighter. People that I externalized and made enemies and othered before become closer, and I begin to understand their perspective, even when I don't agree with everything, but at least I can let them come closer. And then it seems like, oh, compassion is spreading.
Mm,
And that's a beautiful process to de-ice life, brings a lot of life energy back.
mm. De-ice your life. Okay, it's a new bumper sticker, Thomas.
De-ice your life, right?
Well, and you know what you're speaking to in the work you're doing, the collective work, bringing people together, as a collection of individuals who have one purpose to delve into and de-ice. I mean, in the most general way. I mean, we experience this all the time in the work that we do, holding retreats and online to in person and everything else we do. You can see it so clearly that people are wanting and willing to let go of the defense mechanisms, of the protections that people normally keep on a day-to-day basis because of fear, etc. And when people come together, it's extraordinary. And in the case that you're speaking to, the collective wisdom of ancestors of first of all being embodied in presence is the number one and two things, right? But to be able to relate in that way, to have some understanding. I had it in spades just only because of Neem Karoli Baba, he just made that happen. And I can only be so thankful on one level. But when I look back on it, yeah, the main thing, my father, as you said, had some kind of opening that he was not aware of,
Mhm.
but it instigated him to do what he did, which was he wanted healing. He would never have put it that way, but that's what happened. And that started a lifetime of healing for him from an obviously really traumatic situation. Boy, I mean, and you have met many, many, many people, I am assuming, who have gone through that kind of trauma. It's
Yeah.
very difficult.
Mm. And it's amazing. It's like I often say, this kind of voice is like the small old radio in your kitchen that's playing a song that you hardly ever pay attention to, but from time to time you hear that there's music playing in the background within the noise of life. And then it's lovely to feel also in your own, like the story you shared with your father, that if somebody travels from the US to India, like you put energy into something that moves you, something is open.
Mm,
And that is the entrance gate. In that place where that moves us, even if the rest of our life, even if we cannot even say what moves us, we just do something that we even by ourselves don't believe really intellectually,
yeah,
then it's that place. I often say the calling is the echo of the arrival.
the
You know,
calling is the echo of the. I like that. That's
yeah,
beautiful.
it's the part that is waking up, and the echo is the same, and in between is our karma or the
Mm,
trauma. So that's why we often have hard time to hear it. But once we hear it, that place knows something. That
mm,
place knows that awake state. And that process up there is in between. We are going through the turmoil of what hurt us, but so your father knew something, and that brought him to India, and the whole consciousness field that you were in, of course, amplified that, so that that's a great resource too.
yeah.
But that's a beautiful thing. Also, for many people that listen, it's like, if you listen to this kind of podcast, it's something in you is open. Otherwise, you wouldn't listen to this. You must have an inner resonance, and that place that has the resonance
Mm,
knows something,
mm,
not just
absolutely.
intellectual knowledge, but something deeper.
Yeah, yeah,
And that is amazing.
yeah.
That is, yeah,
Ramdas would call it the soul knowledge.
yeah, exactly,
The
exactly.
funny thing is, so when my father, just another anecdote, he came and Maharaji, who we called Neem Karoli Baba, he said, "Well, why did you come here?" And my father said, "Well, I wanted to see how my sons were doing." And Maharaji said, "Well, how are they doing?" And my father said, "Well, they seem to be happy." And Maharaji said, "Happiness is everything." And even in that moment, I knew what he was referring to was not happy-go-lucky happy, but a deep, deep contentment with
Mm,
the course of one's life.
mm.
And yeah, so that he came to see us. He had no idea, none. So nothing to say that working with trauma is not an easy. Oh wow! I heard this story from Raghu talking to Thomas and so on. It is a very, very difficult road. I know it myself because of all the difficulty I had. Even post, I had to work with my father on all of the issues that we had, particularly around anger. That was a huge
Mm.
thing.
Mm.
So, yeah, speak to the reality of working with trauma. And it's not something that just happens right off the bat at
Mm.
all. Difficult to address, is what you say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great that you put it in a. Well, I often say, like when we have a cup, And so the size of the cup, of course, determines how much liquid you can pour into this. So if you have a cup and I want to pour two, whatever, 100 milliliter of water, it's okay. So, but if I want to pour 100 liters of water into this cup, it will be an issue. It will splash all over my, spill all over my room. But what does that mean? So when there is trauma, the cup, which is our embodiment, our emotional integration, our mental integration, the narrative of our life, our ancestral integration, our spiritual integration, all of that creates a holding, an internal holding space. And trauma fragments that, either partly, when it happens very early, can fragment it fundamentally. So then it can create severe symptoms all our life. And so, but so that's one thing. It's always a correlation between what happened to us and how much it fragmented the structure of this cup that we are living through now. And but the sensing of our cup gives us like a realistic relationship to what's needed when we want to heal it. But the more fragmented the cup, which usually happens, then I have ideas about my healing that are not in tune with what I really need. So my trauma also designs, in a way, my healing path.
Oh,
if I want it or not. I can get help, and the people can mirror that back to me, and so I can check and change my expectations, assumptions, ideas. But it's a process. So we need to know that trauma is always an invisible design factor in our life through the symptoms it creates. And one of those is that I cannot calibrate my healing journey well if I'm more hurt. And the other one is that also, that's why there are lots of studies about, for example, adverse childhood experiences and positive childhood experiences. So we would say trauma alone doesn't say much. So of course there's the intensity of trauma, we understand it, but in which relational ecosystem did that happen? If I have an ecosystem that is very supportive and something very painful happens, the relational capacity that supports me and the pain that I experience are in a correlation. So we always look at what's the ecosystemic capacity to support somebody that gets hurt. And that determines the outcome of the trauma. And so the more relational health we have, like you spoke about the communities, you spoke about when people come together, that's relational health. That's the resource. And so that kind of work creates more and more safety in a community. And I'm sure you saw this many times. And then when we feel safe enough, our nervous system starts to release the trauma by itself, bit by bit. When it's not safe enough, the nervous system keeps holding it. If I, through an intervention that is not appropriate, try to break it open, then I actually can hurt it even more because the system is not ready to let it go. So millions of years of life developed a self-healing mechanism. So our nervous system is intelligent enough to hold the pain inside until it feels safe enough to slowly let it go. And then it comes to the surface by itself. Good support is doing that, is creating the right environment and the right relational health and warmth and safety that the system wants to detox itself. And once it starts that and you can digest what it detoxes, then you create a stronger cup and a stronger cup, and then it becomes soil. So trauma becomes soil, trauma becomes soil. And soil is our connection to the ground. It's a connection to nature because my body is nature. And so I feel more and more grounded as nature, as the world, and more open to the world. So that's a beautiful process. So in itself, it's a very elegant and beautiful process, but it needs the right attunement to what's possible at which stage. And there, many people can hurt themselves if they don't know the sequencing well and try to force the healing versus create the right environment for it. So
Mm-hmm.
that's also a bit what you mentioned, and I think that's very right.
Of course, this does bring up, I mean, as you're speaking, and I think of psychedelics and how people use them to delve into their trauma, basically. And some successfully. I mean, I've seen people, many more, maybe not so successful because of the treatment of the medicine as something separate that will change rather than the integration of the medicine into one's being so that we can get an understanding of these states that we are going through. I mean, this is probably a very big topic. I don't know. People must query you about it as well. But I'd rather more focus on what we are focused on in terms of the work we do through Love, Serve, Remember. And you talk about how to heal, give people an idea of what are some of the things. So cultivating inner awareness and presence, that's, to me, and you're obviously, it's number one, unless you have inner inquiry, at the very least, is very difficult. And embodied practice is important because, as you say, trauma is lying in the deepest recesses of our bodies and our nerve centers. And then I come to the one, to me, that is so impactful if people could devote a little bit of time to it, and that's accessing compassion and patience. And I'm right in the front line of that line of working towards. Talk about that, really.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I would maybe add to when we understand, let's say like this. You spoke beautifully about presence. What's presence? Presence is the integrated past. Like presence is the airport that has the power to integrate the past, the split of past, like the life that we couldn't digest. And it also brings in the planes from the future, so emergence. So presence is very powerful. And then when we understand patience, less as, because some people might hear this as, oh, patience is, I need to wait for something. But patience is actually an expression of presence, is being attuned. And that is like that I'm attuned to what the moment can do and what it cannot do. A good healing process is not always like a straight line to the aim, to where we want to go, to the finishing line. It's when you go to an apple tree and you know which apple to pick because it's ripe and sweet, and which apple to leave on the tree because it's not ripe and sweet yet. So it's even hard to take it off. So patience is the capacity to discern what is ripe and what's not ripe yet. And that's a function of attunement. So when you are present, then you are naturally, you feel, oh, here's a gate and here's a wall. You won't run into the wall when there's a gate beside it. So go through the gate. But impatience is, I see a wall and I bump my head against it because there it doesn't work. And so wisdom is also the seeing of the potential gates where life can go through to expand. And sometimes and in the healing process, we see healing is not just that our symptoms disappear. Healing is also that we heal this, it creates soil, and then it opens a gate to pick another apple. Because of that soil, that apple became ripe. So I pick another apple, another process. Even if that doesn't address immediately what I want to address, it builds the circumstances for it. And so when sometimes in life our trauma stress tells us, because there are two levels of urgency. When I see somebody being hurt on the street, and I have my inner response tells me to protect that person. That's also urgent. It's not about me sitting for an hour thinking if that's a good idea or not. It's
Yeah.
happening now. So it needs me now. So presence tells me go and help that person. And so that's one thing. But the trauma stress is actually an inner sense of unquiet and urgency and stress. And that is actually a non sustainable stress. And if I act out of that stress, that's not urgent. That's my past telling me run. When my present moment would say stop, there's a wall, and then boom, I hit the wall and I say it's not working. Of
Mm.
course it's not working because there is no door. You need to go here. There's a door over, go through here and go there.
Yeah.
And this, like how trauma urgency, like the stress that is stored in our bodies, is is creating this what we call impatience, but it's also a disrelatedness with the moment. And that's why wisdom, when we see people that are wise, they're like a laser. They find the click, 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 and life opens up because it's wise. It's like you don't waste energy where you can't go. You put the energy where it's opening, and then one day there will be a door in the wall that you first because the door will open,
Mm.
and then you
Mm.
can also go through that door. And I think that's what you speak about. Why patience? That's the form of. It's not a waiting until we are ready.
Yeah.
No, we're
Yeah.
not waiting.
Yeah. A much deeper part of
Deep.
presence. Patience
Yes.
is,
Yes.
Um, I there was something else from the book, healing from spiritual trauma. So I looked at that and went, that's interesting. Spiritual trauma. And let me read a little bit. Spiritual trauma is a profound wound that occurs when our fundamental trust in life, existence, or spiritual dimensions is broken or distorted. This is not uncommon for people who find themselves on a spiritual path, and then their projections were so strong that they fall down, so to speak. This kind of trauma can occur through personal experiences, such as abuse in a spiritual context, a lot of that going on, or through collective experiences such as societal or religious oppressions. Spiritual trauma can have a deep and long-lasting effects on how individuals relate to themselves, others, and their sense of the divine. When spiritual teachings or experiences push individuals to deny or reject parts of themselves, such as emotions or desire, huge point in my mind, or deem them as being quote unquote unspiritual or quote unquote impure. I mean, I sat around Neem Karoli Baba and having these, what the hell am I doing here? I'm a piece of shit. These thoughts, I can't be in front of this thing, and can create a kind of inner fragmentation in which certain aspects of the self are cut off in an attempt to conform. I'm going to say this again. In an sorry, in an attempt to conform to spiritual ideals. This to me is one of the most dangerous aspects of people, especially getting on the path earlier in their lives, which we were that. So we understand that in spades. But yeah, talk a little bit more about spiritual trauma and its effects on people in terms of that has to be integrated or very difficult to attend to some of the things we've been talking about.
That's right. Yeah. You said it. I mean, you read many things that already illuminate some of it. What I
Mm-hmm.
would like to add is, and that's why often spirituality is attacked in totalitarian regimes or oppressive regimes, because the spiritual core is our sensor of truth. The spiritual core is our sensor. It's like our inner GPS. The more aligned we feel with life, with the divine, with spirit, with whatever name we give that, as you said at the beginning, then this alignment is where I feel my GPS, because in that alignment, I'm synchronized with the rest of life because I'm not separate. So, what is the deepest essence in me? What's the deepest essence in you and everybody is a GPS. And when the GPSs work, then we are synchronized naturally. We don't need outer rules to tell us how to live together and to be honest or to be like this, because we naturally feel we want to be honest because we feel the effect of not being honest. But if I'm completely numb, then lying to everybody seems like, okay, I can do it because it serves my benefit. But when you feel what's the effect, you won't do it, or you would immediately correct it because you feel, wow, it's not good. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. It's not good for all of us. And so when the spiritual essence is being either targeted or hurt or through unconscious processes overshadowed, then, or many people I have seen, it takes some time to reopen the trust, because then, let's say somebody gets abused in a spiritual community. And then it's not only that the abuse happened, it also is, how come I didn't feel that? How come that I got into this situation in the first place?
Yeah.
So then you start doubting your own motivations. Then you say, and then
or guilt.
or guilt or shame or fear or whatever it is. So then it amplifies that shadow that was part of the dynamic in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it cements the trauma, and it reduces the trust in that we deeply inside, what Dick Schwartz calls also, what he calls in the book also the self. It fragments that self energy, or the access to the self energy, even more. So then we doubt our steps, our intuition, our inner knowing even more. So that's why that's painful, because then we need a space, a healing space that helps us to come back to, oh, I can trust my assessment, I can trust my sense, I can trust my intuition, and my GPS actually works, And maybe in that situation, there was an unconscious part of me co-creating this, but eventually, so that I didn't feel this, but it doesn't mean that all my GPS doesn't work. It didn't work in an area in the city, and that's why I wasn't fully aware of something that was going on, But when I don't, now in that area, there's also GPS. So I can drive there too.
Yeah.
And but it takes some time, and I have seen people come to us that carry that pain, that needs the time also to begin to trust again somebody that is for you, but it's a process. So that's why spiritual trauma, and on a collective level, like every time of power over oppressive system, will try to target or confuse that GPS, because the more confusion there is, the more fear, and like it's easier to trigger these things. When you're more connected, you are much more resilient. And so that's why in our time, that's very important that we support that inner connection that is free. It's like it's the most democratic power source in the world. Everybody has access to it potentially. There's nobody can control it. It's like it's free. And so we need to support each other to feel that more, because that is basically the most powerful resource in our life.
Yeah, and that's what happens when we gather together, ultimately, if our purpose is clear. And you have a beautiful thing around, you just mentioned confusion, basically saying, good to make friends with confusion rather than run the other way.
That's right.
So, there's so many things here. We could go on for a couple hours more, but we're at the end of our time. Thanks so much.
Thank
Thomas.
you.
It's been
this was beautiful.
Yeah,
I enjoyed
it's been
this
a
time.
wonderful wonderful hour for sure. Everybody, here's the book he did with Dick Schwartz, Releasing Our Burdens, A Guide to Healing Individual, Ancestral, and Collective Trauma. Great, great information in this book. And there isn't any one of us that is not with some effect of trauma in our life. There is no one. It's part of why we are here, to clear through it. So appreciate your work, man. Really, it's really great. The links, maybe Thomas, you can send me some, email me some links too. We want to put everything up there aside from the book and your own work and so on. And we'll get that up in the show notes, everybody. And you can go to, this is Be Here Now Network, Ram Dass's Be Here Now Network, which is coming on 10th anniversary, 10-year anniversary actually, which is amazing to me. And go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling. You'll catch all of the links and everything else to get you more acquainted with Thomas. And again, thank you. It's it's really wonderful perspective that you're bringing to trauma in this work. So everybody, we'll see you next week on Mindrolling. Bye-bye.